welcome all. And as Vandana pointed out, this was actually Padma was supposed to do this talk, and unfortunately she's out on a personal emergency. So I did joke with Vandana and Rajesh in our earlier call that it actually takes three of us to actually fill in for one Padma. So that's what we are trying to do. And so what we'll do is just go through the journey. So we wanted to actually share our journey as the Web Method Center when we started back in 2004, and then how we've evolved over time, and where we are today, and what we're doing. So let's get into it. I think we've already done the introduction, so we'll move on quickly. So the agenda. So what I want to do is basically have a little bit of a journey or a travelogue into what all we've done. And I think we will have a lot of time left for discussions, Q&A and all that. And then of course, feel free to jump in or ask questions in between as well. Okay. So what I want to do is just a little bit about Software AG, because it's not a very well-known company, but it is one of the earliest software companies. So a little bit about that, our origin story, and how we did some of the transformation journey itself, and then how we have done the acceleration, the breaking barriers, and so on, and what are we going ahead with. So that's the agenda. So Software AG, so we are a global company. Like I said, we have been around for more than 50 years. In fact, Software AG was founded in 1969. So we are about 51 or 51 and a half years now. We are about 800 plus million euros in revenue and 3 billion market cap. It's a publicly held company and in the Frankfurt Exchange and so on. We have over 4,700. I know the invitation went out saying 5,000, so this number keeps moving here and there. So sometimes we cross 5,000 and then we sell one part of the business, so it goes down, and we acquire somebody and then we go up and so on. So currently it's about 4,700 employees, and we are in over 70 countries. So it's one of our unique sort of companies where, given the size, we actually are very, very diversified and distributed. So that's what makes it challenging as well as unique. And what do we do? So basically, we are in the digital transformation business. So we actually started with what is called as Adabas Natural, so which is basically this area. This is the one that started in 1969. It was a mainframe database and all the stuff that we need for mainframes. So it started that way. And over time, it actually has diversified, and we actually now can claim to be the digital transformation platform for any business. So right from the mainframe world as we speak to the latest technologies, application APIs, Internet of Things, and so on. So we actually cover a wide spectrum of technologies and offerings, which will enable any business to transform themselves digitally. Okay, a little bit about our customers. So we primarily are a product company. So our products are used in many domains. So primarily the digital transformation products. So it is domain agnostic. So we actually have customers all over the industry, manufacturing, transportation, government, education, and so on. And of course, banking, insurance, healthcare, and many other vertical industries. So it's a very, as you can see, the software we develop has to actually be adapted for diverse businesses and diverse requirements. So that is something which we have to keep in mind when we do something, which has to be applicable. It started raining, so you might hear some thunder and all that, but hopefully, hopefully it shouldn't disturb us too much. Okay, so that was about Software AG. So now I want to dive in a little bit into our start of Software AG India. So, and I want to call it a head start because in the context of self-management and empowerment, I think this was where we actually got a head start. It was not just a start for us in terms of starting a development center, but we actually got a head start in some of these aspects, and I'll basically walk you all through that, and you'll know why. So basically, we started as Web Methods. So I don't know if people are familiar with the name Web Methods. So it was a company which originated in the US. It was one of the most successful IPOs at the time, around 99 2000. And then at Web Methods decided to start a development center back in 2004, and they hired a bunch of people. We got acquired by Software AG around 2007, and currently we are about 1,000 plus employees in 4 different locations in India. So as you can see, we are almost a quarter of the Software AG workforce. The reason why this is important, and I have this thing called finding direction, is because traditionally what companies do is actually when they set up a development center or any center for that matter, they actually have a few bunch of people, maybe some leadership, move from wherever they are to the place, let's say for Bangalore or any place, to set up shop, to actually get the ball rolling, so to speak, right? And also to have the connect between the center that is forming and connect back to the rest of the company, right? And in this case, in our case, Web Methods was the company, and the headquarters at that time was in the US. So what happened was, it didn't happen that way for us. So what happened was, they hired a bunch of people, all from outside. Nobody from Web Methods actually came in to actually start the center. So there were people who came in, did some research and all that, and we all were interviewed by a lot of people. But then when the actual time came to kick off the center, it was all a bunch of new people hired from outside, with actually no connect to the Web Methods organization at all, right? So, and we all came from different organizations, different backgrounds, and so on. So the first thing we had to do was actually figure out how to work with each other, right? And to find the right direction, because all of us had our own expertise, right? So I was from product development, my colleagues, most of them were from product development. Padma had a mix of skills, product development, product management, and so on. But then nobody had the experience of actually running a development center, right? So let alone starting the development center. So, and what complicated matters more is, we didn't have a local anybody, local HR, local IT, we didn't have local facilities, nothing, right? So we were a bunch of people, and we were told, okay, first goal, yeah, we need to hire more people, of course, because we need to build a team. And then the second thing is, oh, we need to find an office space, right? And third thing, oh, we need to set up some IT infrastructure. We need to print some stuff, print offer letters and stuff like that. So we need to set up a printer. We need to set up this and that. So we were literally a motley crew running around doing a lot of these things, which basically meant that, okay, I think we need to find something which keeps us grounded, right? And find something which actually moves us in a good direction, and not be in this chaotic mode all the time. Of course, we had support from our headquarters in the US. We had support from HR based in Australia, and so on. But then those are all half a world apart, right? So we couldn't really expect people to say, okay, let's wait for this person to decide or tell us what to do, or let's propose something and we'll see what happens, right? So we didn't have the luxury to do some of those things. And we said, okay, we just have to make some calls, right? And basically, one of the first things we had to do was actually formulate some policies, and also have some sort of a self-governance in place, right? Because we were the ones doing the hiring, we were interviewing people, we were making offers. So obviously, a lot of these things are at stake. And in terms of policies, why I say policy formulation is, Um, we had, of course, Methods was a global company, had all the global policies and so on, but we had to localize a lot of these things, right? So we didn't have, I mean, those policies may not actually apply directly to us, and actually didn't apply to us directly, a lot of them. So we had to think on the fly. We said, okay, yeah, we have this policy globally, then, but we have to tailor it to some extent to fit our India context. So we had to do some of those things. A couple of examples I can give you is we had, I mean, every company has a leave policy, right? And the leave policy stated that you actually accumulate leave. So once you join a company, you accumulate leave, maybe 1.5 days or 2 days per month or whatever. And then at the end of the year, you have so many days of leave, right? Or at the end of whatever time frame. But guess what? Things happen. People have babies in their family. Some people are out sick, so they need a little bit longer leave, and they don't have the leave that they can use, right? So it's not accumulated enough. So one of the things we said is, okay, let's try to do an upfront credit of the leave. So we said, okay, let's credit the leave at the beginning of the year for everybody, so that people have some balance, opening balance, and we don't want to go into the leave without pay and those kind of discussions, which is of course not a pleasant discussion to have with anybody. And we said, okay, let's tailor it and make sure that this happens, right? And in fact, at that time we realized, okay, we also probably need to build a leave management system, right? Because we have no way of tracking the leave. So one of our colleagues ended up building a leave management software so that everybody can use it, right? The other challenge we had was we were hiring from different parts of India, and a lot of people were relocating from Pune, Hyderabad, Chennai, and so on. And one of the first things that hit us is when those people landed here, they said, "Oh, I am trying to find an apartment, and actually, I don't have the money to pay a deposit on the apartment." And we said, why? He said, oh, in other cities, they actually ask for only 2 or 3 months deposit. And in Bangalore, they ask for 10 months deposit, right? And as a security deposit. And we don't have that kind of money. So what do we do, right? And so quickly, and of course, they obviously didn't want to get into a situation where they wanted to apply for a loan for that and so on, right? So that's not a good thing to do. So one of the things that we did was, okay, from the company, we will say we will, for specific purposes, and we expanded this policy. So we said, okay, we will give you a personal loan, which is interest-free, for the purpose of providing the employee, so that the employee can actually pay off the monthly, the deposit on the apartment that he or she is about to rent, right? And it's interest free, and then it's actually paid off over the next 12 months or so, right, by the employee. And that's something that we said, okay, let's have that kind of a policy. And then we expanded that to giving the same kind of benefit for people who wanted to buy bikes, because our office at that time was near the old airport, and there was not a good public transport connect to the old airport at that time. So people wanted to live around nearby, and they wanted to buy two-wheelers and things like that. And they, of course, they were starting off in life, so they wanted the money. And
hey, Narayan, sorry to interrupt, Narayan. So one is to go interesting policies, and I've heard interesting things about how did you evolve these policies in terms of people getting together and coming up with policies, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that may be interesting
exactly.
to look at.
Sure, Rajesh. I'll cover that. Yeah. So I mean, all the stuff that I'm covering is basically all these were by discussion. So it was not one person like Padma deciding some of these things, right? So it was all by discussion. We were 15, 20 people at that time. Of course, various titles. Some people were individual contributors. Some people were managers. Some people were the center head, right, like Padma. But we all sat together and said, okay, we have this problem. What do we do about it? How can we approach it? And all of us brought together our thoughts and our experience into it. And we said, look, I mean, maybe we should do this, right? And then we would formulate something and then it would work for most of the time. For things which didn't work, we actually revisited it. So we experimented a lot of things, right? So we experimented with certain things. One of the things we wanted to experiment is, okay, we wanted to do, people complained about the transport because still a lot of people were not comfortable buying bikes or whatever, right? So they wanted to have company provide the transport. And we said, okay, we don't have the numbers of a TCS or an Infosys or somebody, right? So we need inputs from the employees saying, would you commit to would you make a commitment to using the transport if the company provides it, right? And of course, that commitment had to be for a considerable period so that it actually works for the company as well as for the employee, right? And every time this topic came up, there are a couple of people who say, yeah, I need it. And then majority say, okay, it's okay, I don't need it. I'll figure out something on my own, right? And so every time this came up, we bring up this issue, we discuss it, and then we also, even now, we discuss this after 16 years, and we still say, okay, there's not enough people and the people are not really interested, so we drop the idea, right? So this has been the case. So this is an iterative model. So most of the time, we've had to tweak the policy based on inputs. We have to tweak the things like insurance policies or introducing maternity leave was already there, but introducing paternity leaves, child adoption leave, and so on, right? So all of these were discussion within the company. It doesn't matter who came up with the idea. It doesn't matter what the idea was, but this is how the whole thing progressed. And I'm glad to say most of the policies that were set in place at that time in the first couple of years, they are still in place even now. So now, of course, for the last 10 years or 10 plus years, we have a local HR, very senior people, and a good HR organization, but they've never had the reason to change anything because they all came up as a result of this kind of a collaborative and a group effort.
Narayan, can I interrupt you? There are a few questions. So I think one of them, this is from Nitin. What were the people challenges that you encountered during the digital transformation?
Yes, Nitin. Yeah, so we have that covered in the coming slides. So is it okay if we do that at that time?
And then I think this is to do with the design of policies. How did you deal with bias built in into the design of policies? This is from
Vidya. Yeah. So that we can, So the bias, of course, there'll be always some bias, but by the very nature that we were actually seeking input from everybody, right? Whoever was there at that time. So actually, in fact, I still remember the room and the table we were meeting every week. It was basically like the entire company meetings because we were 15, 20 people. And every week, we used to bring up some issues saying, okay, these are the issues. What should we do? How do we tackle it? And by nature, since the discussion was very inclusive and we had a diverse group of people, I think we managed to steer clear of any specific bias. I think that's what worked in our favor because it was not just one or two people deciding on these policies. So I think that's how it worked for us.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, please carry on.
Mm-hmm. And the other aspect, which was very key. So once we were past all our initial troubles, we were settled in an office, we had the infrastructure, we were at a decent size of hiring, right? And maybe 30, 40 people hired already. Then we got to think of, okay, so how should we evolve this center, right? And one of the key things that we realized, and we saw these things happening around us, right? At that time, every company wanted to set up an India Development Center. And we had seen some of them had already established and they were struggling. They were not happy. People like Padma, who actually worked in I2 at that time, and it was in a similar model. I2 had its headquarters in the US and they had started an India Center. She knew some of the pitfalls of what is working, what is not working in such a setup. And of course, I myself included, there were others who were in similar situations. So what we decided collectively is we said, one thing we need to definitely focus on is focus on the ownership and accountability of what we do. So we said we cannot be in staff augmentation mode, or we cannot continue trying to be a low cost center or an offshore center, right? Because we knew that the cost arbitrage will last only for a short time. So what will actually make us a good thriving center is if collectively we have the ownership of what we do, and we excel in the delivery of it, and we actually have the accountability. So the accountability makes a lot of things great, right? Suddenly when somebody is put in a position where the person or the team is accountable to the board or to the leadership, right, senior leadership, then everything comes together, right? So that is something we actually make sure that we just don't want to focus on the cost aspect, and then we want to actually do more on the thought leadership, on the in the innovation and so on. So that was I would say it was a conscious decision at that time, and we pushed for it. Of course, we had some pushback from the headquarters saying, no, since you guys are new, you don't know the context, let's start with something where you can help the team in the US, right? And then we'll see what happens. So we did have those situations. We did have some of those kind of, I would say, I wouldn't say stalling strategies, but it was sometimes it amounted to that, right? To just say, okay, yeah, let's just, you guys try to get this done and we'll see, right? So that was the kind of the attitude. But eventually we got through. Eventually we said, look, it won't work because people don't want to keep helping some other team and just do piecemeal kind of work, right? So we actually made sure that the message gets through. And then I think a year down the line, we actually were successful in getting some ownership of products down in the India Center as well. And that actually, I would say, sowed the seeds of all of these things, right? So not just the ownership part, but finding the direction in terms of policy, self-governance, ownership. All of these things actually helped us sow the seeds of self-management and empowerment in the center. So I would say this is pretty much the DNA of what we do in Software AG India, right? So this went on for a few years. Of course, we excelled in the delivery part. We were able to build trust. We grew in confidence as a delivery center, right? And things have, from the India Center point of view, we actually grew to, I think, almost 100 or 150 by 2007, 2008. And of course, then we saw a few other challenges which were more global. So at this point, I want to hand off this to Harish, who actually can take us through some of the transformation journey that we went through. So Harish, over to you.
Yeah, Narayan. If you don't mind, can you continue presenting, and we could look at the slides?
Absolutely.
So thank you. So I would like to walk you through our agile lean journey in Software AG, like how Narayan described, right? We had run into some specific problems at the business level, and I'll probably talk about it in two steps. One is the transition phase where we moved from waterfall and adopted agile and lean kind of a methodology in our delivery, as well as the second part, which is more or less the cruise control, where we originally started behaving like a self-management team and a decentralized team. So as you see in the slide, right, we are a very distributed R&D center, and the webMethods integration suite itself is composed of more than 40 plus products even at that time. And just about, the current population is 1,100 plus, where back in 2010, it was like around 900. So it was such a diverse, not only in location in terms of products, but when we made a release, it had to be an integrated release. That's the suite release was a bus release. And each of these locations had their own cultures. We had different ways of developing, testing. And we being an integration company, right? It's very crucial that when you sell the product, the entire suite, your own products work well with each other, right? That's the minimum a customer would expect. Narayan, if you can just move to the next slide. So in 2010, like, a quick snapshot of where we were was like, I remember I was still an individual contributor at that time. And I remember one of the major release, which was like a 1.5 year release that was planned, was already delayed by 9 months, right? We had no idea when we were going to release. We were giving ad hoc fixes, escalations would come every day, and we had more than 11,000 defects in the system at that point in time. Testing was largely manual, too many teams, there was little coordination, even reports could not be compiled within a month, right? So that was the kind of state we were in. And definitely the decision to adopt Scrum and go to an agile model was like a top-down decision. It was not a self-managed decision. It certainly came from the business, from the top, that we can't sustain ourselves in this manner for a long time. Narayan, if you can move to the next slide. So that's when we, though it was a top-down decision to adopt agile and lean, the way we went about the transformation and how it proceeded was, I would classify as a bottom-up phenomenon. It was not like centrally mandated. I vividly recall, right, what was the mandate from the top was only to not do an agile just for the sake of it, or just like a cargo cult adoption. You just don't do the stand-ups and have cross-functional teams and do the same things. But it was largely geared towards shifting your mindset and moving from the top-down hierarchy to self-organization. So one of the main things that we did was like teams were given a lot of autonomy. Some teams actually chose Scrum. A few other teams, especially ones in support, said Kanban is more natural for our way of working. They were allowed to experiment with that. The only non-negotiable was we do it in the true spirit of things with the right intent. But we were allowed to do our experiments, and the entire foundation laid was from the lean world on how to do lean thinking and make that as the DNA of our software delivery. And what happens, I'll cover that. I'll quickly cover this journey till now, and then go a little deep onto what was the identity crisis each of us went through that time. Maybe if you can advance to that next thing. Thank you. So by 2013, when we started adopting this, we actually ran into a state where we could have a sustainable rhythm. We automated a lot of things. We were able to predict in advance, and we moved to 6-monthly releases. We said no longer 1 year, 2 year release is too long. We lose the market window. We were able to get into a state of maturity where you could say, I can do 6-monthly releases. And in fact, from 2013 onwards, I think every release we have made it on time, largely on the agreed scope. And even where there were minor changes here and there on the scope, they were not probably due to the internal R&D engineering stuff. It was sometimes a combination of what the customer wanted or what the market needed. And then we are, even now, the transformation still continues, because we are moving from a license-based model to a subscription-based model. We are getting into a hybrid situation where our products run on SaaS platforms on the cloud, and many of our existing customers still also consume it on-premise. So we are still in a journey of transformation, but the major difference I would see from the first phase to the current phase where we are in 2021 is that it is largely decentralized. So if you would see today, we are in a position where we have a potentially shippable build with all the latest changes at least once every month across the suite. Though we have probably 3 times the number of products, we run close to the figure in the slide is just the automated test that is run in the central flow. We have even stopped tracking what are the total number of tests in every team, what every product runs, because they are all running as local CI/CD flows, and they run probably 10 times more tests, a lot more frequently. And it's like a contract. Each product maintains its own quality, and they just, when it has to go to the suite level, they would promote it. And the statistics now are only the central ones. The teams themselves self-manage their own cycles. Narayan, if you can advance to the next slide. So the first thing, right? When Scrum Kanban was introduced to us, it was like a textbook thing. We hired a consultant at that time, and we initially got familiar with the terms. Okay, you have to do a stand-up. You will have cross-functional teams. So there is no longer this thing like a development team develops something, gets the build ready, gives it over to the QA. They test it and then say whether it's okay to go, or again sends it back to the development for meeting the quality standards. All that changed. We were one team now. So some of these things flowed straight from the textbook, but very soon we realized we cannot run. It was not a practical way to just run it totally by the textbook. We quickly realized we'll have to tailor it a lot carefully so that we are able to move closer to our goals. At the same time, we are not compromising with the spirit in which some of these principles are. Could you advance one more, Narayan? So the initial shift from a hierarchical team to a self-organizing team, honestly, was not very smooth. In fact, the initial change put us into complete chaos for a few months. Probably the chaos was there at some level, even for as long as an entire year. So things initially went a lot worse before we started seeing the benefits of doing it this way. The primary thing is, like, every single person went through a period of shock, right? With Lean, we were told, right, things like testing is a wasted effort, or documentation is a waste. And the first time when a consultant would come and say these slogans, it drew reactions of anger, denial. Some people, it went against everything that they had believed. It questioned their identity. People had, worked on for a decade, close to a decade at that time in their roles, and somebody comes and says your entire function is a waste, right? So that evoked a lot of shock. I just saw a quick question on this thing. What influenced the adoption of Lean and Agile? Like I said, it is the pure business chaos we had at that point in time. And we saw adopting Lean and Agile model for our delivery could help us tackle some of those problems and get into a sustainable rhythm in which we could predict releases and deliver something with quality. That was what influenced us to start testing Lean and Agile. So I'm coming back to the identity crisis. So it was not just the test engineers or the documentation engineers, the managers. I had actually just transitioned during that time. I was also the change agent during this transformation, and I was functionally a manager. Now you totally become unsure about the role because you are no longer assigning work, because we say the team actually sits down and voluntarily chooses what task they want to do in that particular sprint. They choose the duration of the sprint. So managers no longer do the estimation. They no longer assign work. They are not even giving commitments for the release. And more importantly, some things that we want the coaches who were helping us with the transformation, strictly mandated was managers were not even allowed to speak in stand-ups. We were allowed to go to the huddle. We could stand there. We can listen to everything, but you never question anything. You don't speak, because, technically we were all the chickens, not the pigs, right? And another mandate that was not, I mean, I say this is a mandate because this was pushed top down, but in hindsight, it proved to be a good thing, was that Scrum Masters, the role of a Scrum Master was always played by somebody from the team, and managers did not become Scrum Masters, because we already saw that as an anti-pattern where the Scrum Master role, which is primarily for facilitation, right? If that is held by somebody who has a role of also of assessing your performance and determining your bonuses, it is an anti-pattern in Agile. It was not, the textbooks did not say so, but I think from various consultants and the industry word, we already knew that this was a path that we did not want to go in. So managers can't even be Scrum Masters. So including me, we were wondering, so then what is my job? Right? I'm not responsible for the delivery. I cannot code. I cannot sit down and do the estimation. I cannot even question or review anything. I'm not even allowed to speak. So what would I do? I mean, do I still have a role? In fact, we also had some churns. There were some real dilemmas some people faced, whether, for example, would quality be assured if you take a bunch of test engineers and make them report to a single manager who was doing development all along? Because the tension between development and testing, we all believed, and in fact, even for me, I was an ex-Novelite, and I am a big believer in that from my earlier job, that a healthy tension between development and an independent, assertive test team is what produces quality. And suddenly you put them all into one team and then say, you have to do it. It is an identity crisis. And to me personally, when I went through the journey, for me, the biggest change in my own life, I would say, is when the managers, we were all, I think it was actually organized by the local management. We all went for an offsite visit to the Toyota factory in Bangalore. And for the first time, to me, that the mind shift happened on why autonomy really improves quality, why a self-organizing, bottom-up kind of a environment can really bring in predictability, innovation, defect-free quality, and also give a glimpse of what is the role of a manager in such a system, right? I still remember when we went in there, we saw, like, I have vivid memories of how I saw one of the workers, they used to measure how long it took to do a particular task. And one person actually demonstrated that, he could put his hand into a box of nuts, right? And randomly he would pick. And that person had actually trained so that he would pick the right amount of nuts, right, through just his feeling the weight, and will always get the right number of nuts he would need at that point in time. I know this looks so trivial, but then to me, this is an example of what individual contributor himself, he is timing and he's figuring out what is the best way for him to work. He sets goals for himself and he's trying to become the best version of himself. Nobody said that as a metric. Nobody said you will get more bonus if you do it right. Or nobody gave him a task that this is how you would pick up. And I saw a lot of us actually learned so much from that visit. Another vivid image was this hand-on card. The cord that is pulled, basically you can stop the assembly line if anybody notices a quality. You don't need to inform somebody, a manager, or you don't need to get permission. In fact, pulling the cord and stopping the assembly line is a very, very costly affair. And yet in Toyota, what they were taught and what the workers themselves believed is, I do it because I don't want the defect to move to the next phase. And when we came back, we tried to translate some of those principles back in the same thing. For us, for a software company, it would be like anybody can say raise a blocker in the build, and the moment the blocker is raised, right, we drop everything. In fact, the team, none of the managers questioned it. The teams did it themselves, and sometimes, yeah, due to old habits, some of us managers would question it, but the higher management also said, you need to trust them, regardless of whether this experiment is a success or failure. Let them do it. We should wait and watch some more. And then teams themselves, right? Nobody, if there is a blocker in their build, they would not continue development. They would not say it is in another person's code and he's going to fix it and somebody else is going to test it, so I can continue, developing my feature. So you had to go through that short-term sacrifices, and we saw a lot of these things started emerging. Once everybody fixates on the principles, then you leave people on their own, don't question them. We did a lot of false moves, but then it has a tendency to self-correct, and then a lot of these practices and individual process flows started emerging. And maintaining velocity across iteration sprints, the velocity went down. Like I said, the curve went down very, very bad. And it came up like a hockey stick later when we figured out the sustainable rhythm. What we did from the management end was we didn't interfere, we did not question, or we did not pressure the team saying you should improve your velocity. As long as we saw that they were trying the right things, they had the right values in mind, that I don't let defects go past, or I won't really take up more things just to shore up the velocity. I will find out, I'll help every team. I will also do the automation. They themselves figured out. So all we had to do was not, poke our nose at the wrong moment, try to push certain things. It did go worse, but we saw that after a while, when teams found their rhythms, things started improving. And that's where as managers, we discovered our new roles as not as guys who are setting the plan, ensuring that people don't move away from the planned path. We did not give the commitments, so we didn't have this thing of whether we are succeeding or failing in a release as a manager. The accountability, the teams took it upon themselves, and the managers, we discovered our roles as enablers, obstacle removers, or sometimes, like, people would say, we are the guys who just have to go around and distribute coffees at the right time, ensure people are in a good mood, they don't get too down when you're not able to get a build promoted for 2 or 3 days. We ensured that people don't burn themselves out. We became coaches. We started focusing on culture building. Instead of telling them, do this way, we started suggesting frameworks on how we can make decisions, how to find our own metrics, how to evaluate ourselves. And then we gave those suggestions and we stepped aside and started watching. I think that is what, to me, laid the foundation for the teams to figure out the processes, the principles, and the values by themselves. And after a time, they started teaching us. And as Narayan would cover later in this session, a lot of new processes, new initiatives started coming from the floor without managers having to push, or we didn't have to invent. They came, they decided, and then we were just helping it. We got into the supporting cast. Yep. There.
One thing I maybe can just add is it actually freed up the managers from the day-to-day. I would say people have a tendency to do micromanagement, right, in the traditional style. So trying to track the progress, trying to see what's going on, and so on. And it actually freed up the manager's bandwidth to do a lot of these things, like think about the longer term, try to see how we can generate more value, right, from what we are doing. So that actually became one of the key sort of shifts in the thinking for the managers, saying, okay, now we don't want to do these things. So yeah, we are acting still as managers, we are acting as guardrails, for the teams and so on. And we are still the connect between the teams and the business, right? So the business goals and the business needs. But we also now can actually devote some time to actually help the business, right? And see what are the next things that we can do, how we can enable the teams, how we can generate more value for the company, right? So that became one of the key shifts in the role of a manager.
Hey, I can't help but interrupt Harish and Narayan. All of us from Samkosel Institute are wondering, did you get certified by us or what? I mean, you are all talking our language, man. There's so many of what you are saying, it is so nice to hear. It's awesome. I made a long list of things that are, fantastic to hear this stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I mean, again, the credit goes to the teams actually. Like I said, it just emerged out of the things. We just tried to stay true to the principles initially that was drilled down. And then I think, Narayan, if you can quickly go to the next slide, right? So over time, ultimately there are just three levers the way we see. There's the overall culture and the people themselves, how they engage they are, and the mindset with which we approach these things. And these are no longer management levers. These are levers that every single person who is part of the team, right, has the power to use. And then together, I think we were able to do it. And purely because of this, right, as Narayan would cover in the coming slides, new structures emerged. Now we have, we do these engagement surveys where the people actually voice out, what are the right things the management is doing, what they want us to do, what they're unhappy with, and new product ideas. We have had products that were conceived by the teams, not from the market or from a product manager elsewhere. It would have started from a senior software engineer in the floor, and slowly they show a POC. Somebody from the top at the highest level, the board notices this, and then they start funding it. And we have got those things going, those ideas we've seen move from a one slide presentation to revenue generators today in our company balance sheet, right? And we strongly believe the earlier foundation that we made and this shift in which, we no longer tried to control, we became those enablers and the platform providers is what kind of helped us do this transition.
And I can't help but point out also, as you complimented the team, Harish, there was one statement you mentioned, how your higher management told us managers to relax and trust the teams, right?
Right.
Typically what we see happen is exactly the opposite, right? So very, very nice to...
Absolutely.
And sometimes we have to go through the curve. I mean, I wouldn't pretend, right, I was happy with many of those mandates. Right? Because you did see the velocity go down slowly. You never saw the light of the for months together. You saw what are we doing, right? But then in hindsight, we are now seeing that it is glad we persisted.
Fascinated by that hockey stick. How long did it take? I'm sorry to get into questions, but how long did it take for that to turn on? 3 sprints, 4 sprints?
No, I would say at least 3 to 4 years.
Oh,
I said 2010 to 2013, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we did a lot of things in pocket, but for it to become like part of a DNA where people started taking these things for granted.
Wow. Awesome.
Right? It takes that long. But then
I have...
Yeah.
Sorry. You complete.
But then once it is in cruise control, right? From that point onwards, like I said, we are doing the transformation to cloud now, right? We are acting the entire technology, the way we are moving from a regular monolithic development to cloud first microservices driven development. And here it isn't cruise control. We don't really have to put in the same kind of structures, and we don't need to invest a lot of energy in it because the teams themselves are navigating this change. That's where I think we are harvesting the investment that was done.
Yeah.
Just to give a perspective, so back in 2010, the R&D organization was about 900. And now we saw in the slides, it's about 1100. So it's not a significant increase in the R&D workforce, but we actually added two new business units altogether. And we have considerable revenues coming from that. So more or less for maybe 20% growth of the R&D organization, we have completely new businesses coming through them, right? So that means the whole transformation actually helped and accelerate. At some point, it accelerated our whole innovation and the delivery part.
A huge productivity improvements completely.
Also, elaborate a little bit on how the innovations from the grassroots level kind of gets evolved.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll hand it over to Narayan. Exactly, he's going to start on that slide now.
Yeah. Before that, I think there was one question.
Yeah, I had a question.
Yes.
So it's very interesting to hear after the story after the transformation about how teams work in a completely self-managed manner. Obviously, like you said, there is a hockey stick kind of a phase which organizations go through till the transformation really takes off.
Right.
But it's very difficult for us to really identify which is that breakthrough moment where this realization came into people's minds. I'm talking more from a mindset perspective. Is it possible to identify that moment, that aha moment or wow moment where this acceptance really came in for this transformation?
I don't know if there was one single moment. Of course, when we made the 6MR releases, right? When we started doing time on time, right? That success is where everybody started feeling that, this experiment was in the right direction and this is the right way to do things, right?
Yeah.
It's the success when you start tasting success, right? Because like I said in the earlier slide, a 1.5 year release that was late by another 9 months, right? For that kind of a team to come back and say, hey, I think we can do it every 6 months, right? Is like where the shift comes. So you start, it triggers off a self-belief cycle. So when you're able to do something in a rhythmic manner without stretching yourself for 2 sprints, then you say at the 3rd sprint, hey, can we go a little more aggressive, right? And nobody else was telling them to do it faster. There was an earlier question about the velocity, right? The people themselves started believing and they started committing more, right? Everybody wanted to do more. Everybody was interested in, because they owned the product. Earlier, somebody could say, hey, I finished my development, it's handed over to the thing, or the test engineer would not have anything to do with the first 5 days and he'll say, I have not got a build. I've been familiar with such scenarios earlier, but then there comes a point where all of them are sitting together and saying, okay, let's do a demo this Friday.
Yeah.
Right. So that shift happened. A lot of micro shifts at every single level, every single person's shift. So I don't know exactly when, there was not a light bulb moment, but suddenly we saw that, we are a different kind of a team and a company.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So Harish, sorry, I think fantastic to hear from you. Narayan, you too. So one follow-up question from Harini's thing is that now as a manager, it's a very difficult psychology you must have gone through in the transformation, especially when it lasts such a long time, right? If it is 1 month, 2 months, you can somehow, survive it. You kind of feel valueless as the team changes into a self-managed team. And so how did you sustain that? And how did you demonstrate value contributions during that phase, which is sometimes the reason why it fails as well, right? Because managers start to feel very restless, either leave or get to interfere. How did you guys manage that? Because it's stunning what you achieved.
I think the fuel is trust.
Yeah.
Right. I'll give you a very interesting example. 2 years ago, Narayan would talk about something called a tech interrupt. Later, I don't want to steal his thunder. But in one of those hackathon events, right, different teams participated. And 2 years ago, I also threw the hat into the ring. We were a team of 3, me and 2 other managers, right? and we went through just like everybody else. We were evaluated by a team of technical individual contributors, right? That is the kind of role reversal we have achieved in the
Fantastic.
Yeah.
right? So they were the judges who were judging us, and we passed through the screening and finally reached up to the an award from the CEO. But then that is the level where we no longer see this manager. Of course, there have been criticisms that what does a manager do, or do we even need this thing? And thanks to Project Oxygen and all the other research that, you know, still kind of says managers do have a place in this system. But then I would say all of that boils down to trust. There, for the period in which we were still experimenting, we didn't have anything to show. Our management put their trust in us. We put the trust in the teams, and the teams also trusted in us.
Yeah. And there were people who didn't believe in this, and unfortunately or fortunately, they did end up leaving the company. So even that actually happened. So it again boils down, like Hari said, the trust in, I think, at all levels. I think that was the key.
Hey, Narayan, sorry to interrupt, but I think, you know, we have lots of questions that are
Lots
there.
of questions. Okay, I'll quickly go through the innovation part and then we can do the Q&A. Yeah, so so quickly, I think after that whole transformation and the transition, so I think one of the things that the realization happened was originally, we had that in mind when we started the center, but then this kind of reinforced, and we said, yeah, we definitely need to work in a more systematic way to increase our value proposition to the company. And the way to do it was, of course, to focus on innovation. We had mastered the delivery aspect of it, and we were center of excellence for the delivery. But then we said, okay, we can't remain there because there are definitely higher order things that we can do, right? And one of them is the innovation and the thought leadership. So this is where we had a pivotal moment. So actually we had many people coming around that time. I think this was around 2013, 2014, where there were a lot of startups that were beginning to emerge in India, especially in Bangalore. People had a lot of ideas coming. People were excited about a lot of new technologies and so on. And so we said, okay, let's actually do something about it and see how we can accelerate. So we embarked on something we call as the innovation programs. So I'll basically give you, I won't walk through all this, but maybe just a summary in the interest of time. So what we did was we said, okay, one of the things we could do is actually knowledge sharing, right? So people who have learned something new and they want to share it, we said, okay, let's do some tech talks in an organized way. And Trending Fridays was a forum that actually Harish started, and he still runs the Trending Fridays forum, and there's one Trending Friday talk right after this one at 7:30 today. So we actually encourage people to volunteer and talk about the new technology, whatever new process, new practice, and so on. And a lot of people, of course, it's voluntary. People would come in and join, and they all, of course, learn something new, right, at the end of the day. So that was one idea. We said, okay, let's share some of the things, showcase the things that people have built, right? So people are proud to show what they've built. So it could be a new product, it could be a new feature in a product, right? And we said, okay, let's take the pride in showing that. And of course, in R&D, we had so many products, so many teams, even within Bangalore. And we have a consulting organization also in Software AG in Bangalore. So we said, why not just use the internal audience, right? So each team sets up a stall, like a demo booth, and they showcase, and everybody goes around visiting each of the stalls and see what the team has to offer, right? So we call that as an unbox event. So usually this happened after every release, a 6-monthly release, so twice a year, right? Then we came up with the idea of a focused hackathon. So we gave a really complex problem, and we said, okay, we challenged all the teams to basically solve the problem in the best possible way. and we called this as a knockout. And we actually said, and we made it a very fun event. We actually said, okay, from Friday evening to Sunday evening, actually people would end up staying in the office, 48-hour challenge. And we used to make a lot of, the challenge was thrown open on Friday evening. People would work day and night. Of course, have a lot of fun also. We had arranged for beds and coffee, tea, breakfast, dinner, everything in the office. And actually it was a gala time. But at the same time, of course, we had a lot of fun solving these complex challenges. So all of these things came to a head in something called Tech Interrupt. So all of these platforms basically led to people saying, okay, hey, I have a new idea for a product, right? Or I have something which actually can help the company get more revenue, right? So that's when the idea of a Tech Interrupt was formed. And we said, okay, let's actually make it open. So instead of giving a problem and asking people to solve, like what happens typically in a hackathon, we said, okay, let's try the entrepreneur mindset, right? So we said, you think of it as, okay, you are a startup founder, you come up with the idea, you come up with the business case for that idea, right? So you do your research, you maybe even do a prototype, and you present to a set of people who can evaluate that, right? And this event, what we call as a Tech Interrupt, was born at that time. And that is something which actually really accelerated our journey of innovation. So this is something where in the first year, I think maybe we had about 40 ideas which came in and with various teams. And then of course, there were some ideas which made it to the top, and then the prize was given away and all that, right? So initially it started small, and people of course are thinking only incrementally. So, and they're still thinking within their boundaries of the product, right? What they're working on. And slowly, year after year, they said, okay, I think I need to do something much bigger. So let's look out and see what is the trending technology. So whether it was big data at that time, or IoT, or nowadays it's all AR and VR, AI, ML, and so on, right? So every year, the boundaries were kept getting pushed, and people actually looked out for technologies, ideas beyond in the industry, what is trending, and they wanted to bring it back to the company either as a new product idea or a significant difference to our product set. And that actually accelerated the whole innovation cycle within the company. So here are just some images of what we did. We all do posters. When we were in the office, right? When we were working in the office, so we always loved putting posters for any of these events. So all of these things are just images of things that we splashed across the floor in the office. So these are some of the, we also know how to have fun. So this was one of the knockout events, the 48-hour challenge that we did. So as you can see, there are people working on the problem, brainstorming and all that here, but you also see people came with their guitars, some people came with their barbecue sets, people did some cooking themselves, there was some dance stuff happening, so yoga, meditation in the morning and so on. So we made it a fun event, which people really love to do. And this idea came from the people. Again, this is not something that some manager cooked up. This idea came from one of the guys saying, okay, what if we do this, right? And then I think this is one of the events what Harish was referring to, is the judging panel for this event, the challenge that we had thrown out was all individual contributors. So there was no management involved. This was the event where these guys said, okay, we will be the judging panel, and everybody else participated, including managers. And then they were judged, and the prizes and so on happened. So, so this is something which all of these things came very organically, but as managers, we put a little bit of structure. So we said, okay, yeah, there will be hundreds of ideas coming in, but how do we channel this in the right direction? Because otherwise, if things go in different directions and they're pulling at each other, we will never get anywhere, right? So the management input would be.
Narayan, can I stop and ask you a couple of questions, because I have to leave in 10 minutes.
Yeah,
Very
sure.
interesting session. Thanks a lot. So a couple of questions from my side. One is, how did you kind of avoid popular / consensus view versus experience, some key people's experience and knowledge view discussions? And the second question is, how do you handle career paths in self-management?
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, in consensus, I mean, I wouldn't say we went by consensus all the time. So it was a lot of debate. It was a lot of discussion in every team. I mean, of course, there are people who are senior technically, they are architects and they are senior engineers and so on. But the very nature, how we had put together the group of people, we encouraged people to speak up. So that was one of the key things from the beginning. We said, okay, and even every time any of us hire a new person, right? Whether it's Harish or Tanika or me or any other manager, we actually tell the person right on day one that if you have any concerns, speak up, right? If you have an idea, speak up. If you have a problem, speak up, right? So we consciously tell people that, look, there is nothing wrong in telling or speaking up. And whether it's your opinion or somebody else's opinion, of course, we have to be respectful in the dialogue or in the debate. But people can stick to their opinions, people can debate. And of course, sometimes people just agree to disagree, right? So that also happens a lot. But overall, I think the teams came with some, initially, like Harish said, there was chaos, there was some tension, sometimes creative tension, sometimes it was not creative or not productive also. All that also happened. But at some point, the teams came to an equilibrium, right? So they knew, okay, if I say this, I know that this person might say this or the other person might say this, and they would actually try to see how they can make their point without being confrontational or without outright getting a negative sort of a response from somebody, right? So it actually sort of stabilized at some point. Maybe it took 6 months, a year for that to happen within each team. But consciously as managers, we said, look, there is no one person who is an expert, because the technology and the products that we have is too vast and too diverse for one person to be called as an expert in our technologies, right? So there cannot be, although we have, of course, a chief architect and so on, but no one person can humanly be an expert on this. So we said, we have to respect, we have to get all the opinions, and only then we can proceed further. So that was the model that we evolved, and that's continuing even now. Right?
And also, just to add one more thing is, it is also about the experiments. It is not just at the end of saying, okay, I know by experience, all those things need to be tried out, because it may not necessarily suit in that environment. So everybody was free to try it out, and through smaller experiments, if it is proved to be right, yes. In fact, in the primary lean principle at the time was to slow down to get faster. That was actually not intuitive for many, but we actually got advice saying, okay, why can't you try out? So we tried out, and it was true. We had to slow down to get faster. And that was the biggest learning impact for me. I mean, for most of the people, which was counterintuitive, but it was true. So we had to get slow to come faster. And also many things like how do you optimize? What do you optimize is also important to get into the speed of the cycle time. That's what our primary motive at the time, to improve. We did many things which are actually counterintuitive, though it was an advice from some experts, but it was a team's own decision to really put it in practice, see whether it works, and make adjustments to the surrounding factors, and then move ahead. So it is not about just, okay, because somebody said that we will follow. No, it is also about experiments. Many such experiments, I think, have happened. I think Harish teams have done many experiments also. So it's like everybody, whoever want to try, and then come out with challenging or, I mean, very compulsive arguments. Why not? We have data, because we have tools to bubble up these experiments results, and that will show up. Somebody said, okay, in the Andon code equivalent of global lock, everybody said, oh, no, don't lock down the code just because of one defect. No, it was locked down for some time, and that experiment was successful, and it was it was actually healing actually much more because of left shift. When they actually locked down the code, everybody thought, okay, oh, what will I do? Where will I code? Am I going to sit down separately, or am I going to find something so that my production line is not broken? So everybody actually started left shifting their tests so that they won't even reach that point of somebody is able to pull that. So it's like lot of tests got shifted left, and lot of tests got automated, because the moment you actually have a global lock, then it means it hurts everybody. So they don't want to have that. So it's like a self-learning automatically happened because of the correct system level constraints that have been introduced. Small changes, but it's all experiments and also learning from that.
Thank you.
I think Vivek's other question is also very interesting. Basically, how do you handle career paths?
Yes, so that is, I think every company does have challenges there. So in our case, of course, I would actually go back again to the original, the initial days, the origins. One of the things, even as Webmethods, as a company, we were proud of, is we always treated the management path and the technical path on path. So we always said, because ultimately we are a technology company and a knowledge driven company, right? So we cannot not be mindful of the career paths for the technical folks. Of course, there are always very, very easy parallels for the management growth, right? The management paths. But for technical paths, we said, yeah, we need to have certain goals, certain objectives for every, I would say at every level or every title that we have in the company. And we actually make sure that people work towards it. And we give the right incentives or the encouragement. Sometimes it has to come from within. So they have to also, people have to have the interest to reach a certain level, whether it's an architect or whether it's a manager or so on. But we always made sure that we are valuing the technical contributors and individual contributors as much or if not more than the management. So that was one of the key things that we had done. I think in addition to that, so maybe Tanika, Harish, anything else you could think of?
Yeah, I think one, the team lead position, right? It is a nice example, right? Where a lot of people, when they have a dilemma whether they want to pursue the management path or the technical path, right? Purely we discovered this new thing like a team lead where somebody can test the waters. We could help them groom to that kind of a role where you're coaching people and you're getting more people, balancing your people focus with your task focus, etc. And then the individual still has a choice. A lot of times in earlier what we saw was there is a lot of pressure, right? You think you want to become a manager, or then you figure out, okay, this is not my cup of tea, or I don't want to keep doing this all the time. Then a lot of times people still have to continue that path because it becomes a loss of face for them, right? They don't want to see it as a failure. So officially kind of brought this role in which somebody can try it out. And, we kind of made this is where we walk the talk and say that both the paths are equal. They are different, but one is not greater than the other. So you could come to this role, you could test your waters. If you need any support or coaching, we will help you to do that. After that, you have a choice to say, yes, I like to do it, I would want to do it, or you can go back to a role. And there is no loss of face in anybody. We have had people move between these roles. We have, without any stigma, without having to explain it to others, people have moved from management roles back to the technical roles and have stayed on with the company for multiple years. They have moved, some people who have been architects for a long time or have been a senior technical role, wanted to test the water on being a manager. So we have allowed that. And the very fact that the system allows this kind of a path shows we treat them in even key.
And also one more thing is about lateral movements also. It was, in fact, what it was considered earlier as a like, oh, you had to make a lot of changes to move from a QA to development or vice versa. All those things have become suddenly seamless because it is all the same. That is one of the maybe side effects of this Scrum team, because Scrum team now all everybody same engineers. As long as you know how to do the coding, now they know even much more closely with the developer, because they are in the same meeting. Whenever it fails, they know, okay, what is failing? I have to sit with the same person to make it happen faster, because for a cycle time is very important because of lean. So everybody actually works together. During that work, they're able to pick up the necessary skills, not only QA picking up the development skills, the other way around as well. So the development is also picking up, okay, how do we quickly automate so that I need not actually wait for something to propagate into the production line. So all those kind of cross learning happened, and we saw some merging of roles as well. While we had some challenges, but we also had that cross movement as well. It was much more simpler. Yeah.
And we have facilitated movement between the teams. So it's not like one person is hired into one team and that person stays there forever. So we've always encouraged people to move from one team to another of their interests, and that has happened. That happens multiple times in a year across a lot of teams, and that also gives that. I would say people who are really eager to learn new things, and people who are saying, okay, yeah, I think I've done this, I've done that, I've learned what I can in this role here, and they are actually challenged to go somewhere else and do something different, right? So that way also it has helped.
You here, we're running out of time. Are there any other questions? There are a lot of questions there. I'm just wondering, how do we pick the lucky one?
Yeah.
I am not able to see the question, so maybe because I'm presenting.
What's that, Vandana?
My question was, has Narayan done with his slides? Then I can stop sharing.
Yeah, maybe just one couple of last slides. So where we are right now. So I think that might be relevant. So basically, yeah, this section I call it as a full speed ahead, because the success of all those actually we are currently in that mode where we have every year there are several patents filed. In fact, Software AG India files the largest number of patents globally. 10 plus brand new products introduced from India, numerous features, ideas, process and innovation, optimization, and so on. So all of this has happened through these initiatives that we did, mainly driven by the teams. And of course, we also undertook a Great Place to Work survey, which is largely based on, the certification is based on the responses from the teams. So about 60% of the organization is actually goes through a survey by this institute called Great Place to Work Institute, and the certification is largely based on that. And we participated in that for the first time last year during the pandemic, during the whole lockdown, and we came out. Of course, we were certified, and we actually were rated as the top 50 companies to work for the Great Place to Work for women across India, across all industries. And we are in the top 75 companies in the IT industry as well. So that was a proud moment for us as a validation of all the things that we have been doing in the last several years. And one small fun fact, I would say, so we also took our self-enablement, self-management to a little bit extreme on the fun activities. So we all, at the very early on, back in 2004, 2005, we came up with something called as an employee club, which is by the employees for the employees. And again, this was decided that, okay, every employee will contribute 100 rupees per month from their paycheck and have a corpus to do a lot of fun activities, right? So it could be cultural programs, Independence Day celebration, or Diwali gifts, or sports, or whatnot, right? So we have continued that tradition. Now the 100 rupees is probably, I think, 150 rupees per month, right? So, and it's adopted across all the locations in Bangalore. And we end up doing a lot of, I mean, of course, now with the size that we are, 1,000 plus people, we actually have a good corpus to do a lot of good events. And we don't have to depend on company to budget it and approve it and so on, right? So this is something I thought would be also interesting on the fun side of self-management as well. And of course, last but not the least, it was also carried on to our corporate social responsibility, where a whole bunch of people wanted to contribute to social causes. And so we've done a lot of that over the last few years and contributed, helped go to orphanages, old age homes, do relief for flood hit victims, cyclone victims, and whatnot, right? So we've done a lot of that, and it's largely all coming voluntarily from the people. And then, of course, the whole motto going forward is, of course, we want people to empower themselves, foster an empowered culture, have honest feedback. We also want to challenge employees, right? And of course, we will be there to coach, mentor, and train everybody. And one thing that we have is, we call it as the tagline is, if you have the play, we have the stage. So we can provide you the stage with whatever play that you come up with, right? So that is what we truly believe in, and we want to continue doing that. So thank you very much. So Vandana, I'm done with my slides, so we can go on to the Q&A.
Stop sharing also, Narayan.
Yes.
Fantastic. So first of all, thanks a lot. And I think I especially have to also thank both of you, Tani as well as Harish, for responding to all the questions on the chat window, because I think the number of questions were very high, and we couldn't really cover them in all of them during the speaking time. So thanks so much for covering them as you.
I thought we answered all the questions in at least which are addressed to everyone. Is there any question that needs to be answered still?
If there is any, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question, because I think we are done. But before that, thank you, all of you. I mean, I think you did a phenomenal job. You did not let us miss Padma at all. So appreciate it. Though I'm afraid I would have Padma also, but I checked with her. She said it was not possible for her to make it. So thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, Vandana, I didn't have a question, but I really wanted to appreciate the three of you. Honestly, I know it's a repeat, but I think it's worth it. I mean, putting everything of so many years of effort and work into 1 hour, I think it's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and Chris, looks like people from Novel are cool. Really good job they do.
Yeah, that is true. So Rajesh, now Novel cannot claim the credit for this. These guys have done a good job. But yeah, we can do this.
No, so
you can claim credit for it. Some of the practices, I think, even how to coach managers the first time, right? I remember I attended one of the trainings you gave, where, we are put into a simulated session of a project, different events happening and other things. And we have used those, I've done it myself to groom my managers. So you can also take the credit for it.
Harish, that is your modesty speaking out there. You guys have done a phenomenal job. It's not easy with like Narayan was saying, 1,000 people organization to undergo the 3 years or 4 years of stress of, getting there. And now you're in cruise control. It's a phenomenal job. I can appreciate it because I understand the difficulty of it. So it's phenomenal. And such a great, this thing, Rajesh, for Senko Style, for you guys.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic example of what self-managed teams can do and the persistence of it, right? So I'm outside, so I can speak for that.
Absolutely, Chris. Absolutely. Yeah, there are so many things to call out. You said management did not jump in when there was trouble.
Yeah.
Hockey stick after a drop in velocity. Higher management told managers to relax and trust the team.
Yeah.
And Tanika made that great phrase, slow down to go faster. So many cool things here. Again, another comment which came here for such sessions, we need to have a part 1 and a part 2 because
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you should call Padma because a lot of credit goes to her. She has been the anchor all these years, keeping it together. And in fact, in one of the earlier discussions we were having, right, a lot of times it's not easy. Now I appreciate a lot of things which I probably was not conscious earlier, that she has been shielding us from the headquarters or this thing. It would not have an easy job for the top person, right? The fact that we could go and have our canvas and have our play, I think her role as the sheet anchor was very, very crucial. In fact, that is something which really warrants one full session. And I'm sure there'll be a whole treasure trove of insights we can get from her.
Yeah. And by nature, I think her management style is very, very inclusive. So I think it blended beautifully. And I think we were all very lucky to have her as the center head, and we all could actually contribute. I mean, absolutely no egos, no name dropping, title throwing, and so on, right? So I think a lot of credit for her to build this kind of a culture, be open, be honest with each other. So yeah, truly appreciate what she has done here.
Maybe she should take one session on how to put the highlights on people. She does that.
Absolutely. She does that a lot.
Absolutely awesome.
I want to get her in whenever I can, because I mean, I have heard her. I've of course known her for many, many, many years now. And it would be very interesting to see what work she has done. Also on my other interest of diversity, right? I mean, I think she has done a phenomenal job with respect to diversity. I remember a time when I saw pictures of all of you getting, equipment for work from home being shipped to the employees. I mean, those early on, I think those are all phenomenal actions. So absolutely looking forward to hearing her also.
So Vandana, hi. Vandana, Rajesh, this is Jyoti. Absolutely, I agree. This was a fantastic session. Just to rephrase my question, and I think I would certainly like to have Padma on board, because what I would be interested in knowing is how she managed the crossroad in between, innovating on what the company would produce and create versus the change management that was happening inside within the teams, right? So you're moving from a hierarchical model to a self-managed model, right? So that's the thought process, which I was actually, maybe I didn't frame my question properly, and that's why I'm, asked that how did you tackle that? Because there was a lot of, in a R&D organization, a lot of skilled people are there, and to lose them at that point when you're actually at that crossroad is what I would like to know from Padma is how did she manage that? And how did she come out of, because I heard Harish saying things got really, really bad before they got good. That's the point which I was very interested in knowing. What was that tipping point which made them change?
Narayan, if you any throw on that.
Yeah, sure. No, I think by that time when we went through the journey, the transformation journey, we were, I think, about 8-9 years into the company. And I think the entire leadership had very, very good regard. Everybody regarded the leadership, especially a lot of trust that people had in Padma, in the senior management and so on. So I think that was one of the key factors where people really implicitly trusted that, okay, if Padma is saying something, then obviously there's no question on the intent, right? So why she's doing it? It has to be whatever she does, it is usually in the best interest of the company and for the center, right? So people actually took that as a positive. So if Padma is saying something, if some senior management is saying something, then let's just trust with their opinion or their viewpoint, and then just move on, right? And let's try to do whatever best we can do to help the situation. So I think that was the first, I would say, the key factor in getting people sort of continue on that path, even at the lowest points for us, right, during the chaos. So I think that was the critical factor. The other factor which sort of propelled us into the innovation that you asked, the question you asked, is we basically said, look, we have to do innovation. We have to innovate. Of course, everybody talks about, okay, yeah, you don't have a specific time for innovation. You can't just think for 2 hours or a day and come up with some innovative ideas, right? So people always say it has to happen every day on the job. We are tackling some tough problems. tricky problems, innovation happens. Yes, that is very true, right? But as a company, we also want to give the space for people to do it. So one of the things what happens during this agile transformation and the 6 monthly releases is people just don't have the breathing room to do that, because people are trying to say, okay, I have this sprint, I have my task to do, I have to finish it in this 2-week sprint or 3-week sprint. And yeah, I came up with this good idea, but I don't have the time to do it now, right? Because I have other pressing deliverables that I have to do, right? So what we did as an organization is we said, okay, yes, we all have our deliverables we have to meet, the commitments that we have to meet, but let's set aside some time. And this is where the Tech Interrupt came in. The name Tech Interrupt also is basically interrupting the whole thing that we were doing at that time, right? So whatever we were doing, we said, let's drop it. Let's try to come with something. Maybe you have noted down some ideas. You want to do something, you want to experiment. We give the time for people to do something about it, right? To experiment, to do a prototype and all that. And what we did was we said, okay, you can still do your work, maybe commit less, because again, the whole point of Scrum or the Lean was the teams could commit a little bit less so that they can accommodate other things, right? So we said, let's pick a time when it is conducive. So usually this Tech Interrupt was happening after our major release, which was in October. So we normally did this in the October-November timeframe, and after the Tech Interrupt, we have the Diwali party and so on. So that was a very nice sort of a segue into the celebrations and so on. So what we did was we said, yeah, let's give us the time, let's give the people the time. And what exactly turned up happening is people actually continued to do their work, and they put a lot of discretionary effort. Now they were so passionate about their idea, their innovation or their idea, people would actually come on the weekends. They said, okay, let's finish our work during the week. We'll come brainstorm on the weekends. We'll work on the prototype. We'll prepare the presentation and so on. So there's a lot of that happening. And even now it happens. Every year when the Tech Interrupt happens, people are still doing their work, right? And then they're spending late nights on weekends and stuff like that to actually make that idea materialize, and then they can showcase that. So that's how the people were charged up to do the innovative part, because that's the fun part, right? Everybody lives to do the fun part, and that's where a lot of this happened. And since we collectively enabled that to happen, right? So that is where people nobody was penalized saying, okay, yeah, you didn't deliver this, then why did you spend time on Tech Interrupt, right? Nobody asked that question. So that actually helped in the whole innovation process.
Okay, that's really great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I think we have overshot the time like crazy, 15 minutes over. Thanks so much for to you guys for extending your commitment by 15 more minutes. Loved the session. I think if you scroll down the comments, you'll see the appreciation which has come for the session from everybody. So thanks a ton. I know you all put in a lot of effort to prepare for it, and awesome. Maybe we have to get you back another time. So we'll connect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you, Vandana and Rajesh, for giving us the opportunity. I think it was great fun for us to actually relive those days. So we had all of this week, we had all these think ups and, oh, this happened, that happened, and thinking about what happened at that time. So it provided us the opportunity to go down the memory lane. And of course, this is a great opportunity also that they provided us.
Pleasure is all ours, Narayan, Kanika, Harish. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Close one.
See you next month.
For
Bye.
Everyone.